Hey guys, it's Chris at Highline Guitars. You're watching another one of my YouTube guitar building videos. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I hope that by the end of this video, I'll have earned the honor and privilege of your subscription. Now, for those of you who subscribe to my channel already, or at the least watch my videos on a regular basis, you know that right now I'm in the process of building a 6-string multi-scale fan fret guitar. And in a recent video, I had applied, I think it was about 11 coats of Crystal Lax Brightone instrument finish on the body. And I had promised at the end of that episode that in this episode I was going to level sand, polish sand, and buff that clear coat to a high gloss shine. However, I've decided to change the plan a little bit. In truth, I prefer doing that sort of work, the level sanding, polish sanding, and buffing, a little bit later on in the assembly process, because the process of assembling the guitar can be somewhat physically involved. As a result, there's always a possibility that that clear coat can get scratched, dinged, or damaged. So I think it's better to wait till later on in the process to avoid that. But there's another reason for it. Typically, in the past, I have been using a process of dry sanding when I level sand and polish sand my clear coat finishes. And this is something I learned years ago when I first started applying the water-based clear coat finishes. I found that dry sanding was a better way to do it because you could actually start the process sooner after applying the finish rather than having to wait for the finish to fully cure. In most types of clear coat finishes, whether they are solvent-based or water-based, if you're going to wet sand the finish, you have to wait till they're fully cured. If you try to do it sooner rather than later, it can soften the clear coat and cause issues with deep scratches and gouges and things like that that can be difficult to buff out. So it's better to let those finishes fully cure. This is especially true with water-based finishes. A water-based finish, if it isn't fully cured, when you try to wet sand it, the water can soften the clear coat and cause the problems I just mentioned. So you want to wait and make sure that the clear coat has fully cured. And with most water-based finishes, and particularly with the Crystal Lax Brightone, I think it's a good idea to wait at least 2 weeks, even 3 or even 4 if you have the time. If you're in a hurry, you should really be considering a different type of finish. Or you should definitely use a dry sanding technique, because dry sanding isn't going to soften a clear coat that hasn't fully cured. However, one of the disadvantages with dry sanding, and that's one of the reasons why I'm not going to be doing it on this guitar, is in the end, it's really fairly expensive. The products that I use for dry sanding are Super Acrylic sanding abrasives, and these sanding abrasives are really, really expensive. And to be successful at dry sanding with them, you have to change out your abrasives fairly frequently. You can't let them get clogged up and the surface full of the sanding dust, because that limits their effectiveness. And as a result, you can damage your clear coat, especially if it isn't fully cured. So I've decided with this one, I'm going to go back and use my tried and true wet sanding technique. And obviously to do that, I have to wait until it is fully cured before I can do that. So I'm going to give it about another week to cure. In the meantime, what I can do, and what I'm going to do in this video, is I'm going to do some of the initial fret work on the multi-scale fan fret guitar neck. And what I need to do is I need to bevel the edges of the frets, and then I'm going to give it an initial fret leveling. I'm not going to go all the way through with recrowning and polishing or any of that. That's going to come much later. But for now, what I can do is I can bevel the frets and level the frets, and that way it's easier to do it before the neck is installed into the guitar body, because this will be a set-in neck. It's going to be glued into the body. So I can do that work now while there's no body in the way. And that's going to save the finish on the guitar. And it's going to allow me easier access to all the frets without the body being in the way. So let me bring you in closer and I'll show you what I'm going to be doing. The tools that I'm going to be using are, first of all, my notched precision straight edge. And what I'm using this for is to check to make sure that the neck is level. I want especially the fretboard to be perfectly level when I do this initial fret leveling. And these notched straight edges are generally made for either 24 3/4 or 25.5 inch scale lengths. Now this is a multi-scale neck, but I found that by using the short scale and placing it on about the 3rd fret, it actually fits on to the fretboard, so I can check to see if it's level. And in this case, it is perfectly level, which I had checked it once before and adjusted the truss rod. But if the neck wasn't level, if there was a gap at either the ends or in the center, I could adjust the truss rod to bring it back to a state of perfect level. And that's necessary before I start doing the leveling itself. Now the tool that I'll be using for the leveling is my trusty steel fret leveling beam. Most of the ones that you'll find out on the market are aluminum, and from personal experience I can tell you that aluminum has a tendency to ding and get damaged. So I prefer to use steel. It's much more durable and will last a lot longer. The top and the bottom surfaces have been precision ground, which is necessary to get accurate fret leveling. And then on the top surface I have applied a strip of 320 grit sandpaper. This is a sticky backed sandpaper, and I just apply that to the top. On the bottom I have 220 grit, which I probably won't use, but there have been cases where I needed something a little more aggressive than 320, so I have the 220 just in case, but I doubt I'll have to use that on this. The other tool I'm using is my fret beveling tool, and this is a homemade tool. I simply took a big piece of scrap rosewood, and on my table saw I cut a slot that's at a 35-degree angle that is the same thickness as this file. This is a fret dressing file, a larger fret dressing file, and I placed it in there at a 35-degree angle. Then on the bottom I attached a piece of 1/4 inch thick Delrin plastic with screws that are countersunk into the surface. And with this tool I can bevel the edges, the ends of the frets at a 35-degree angle. I usually will start out holding the file so that it is perpendicular or parallel to the sides, perpendicular to the top, and I will grind them flat. Then I will rest the tool so that it's lying on the top of the frets and that this file is at a 35-degree angle, and then I will grind that the ends into that 35-degree angle. And I have an arrow on the top which shows the direction that the teeth cut in. That makes for more efficient cutting. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll start by grinding these ends of the frets with my fret file, and then from there I can move on to doing the leveling. To begin the process of beveling these fret ends, I want to make sure that I lay the file so that it is parallel to the sides, and I've got my 3 fingers kind of overhanging the file, and I can place them right against the neck so I can get a feel for the position of the file. And then all I'm going to do is just run it along that edge. Now there is a possibility with this file that I'm going to grind off some of the finish on the side of the fretboard. I could mask it off, but the masking tape would just simply get torn off in this process. It doesn't really matter though, because the finish I used on the neck and the fretboard was polymerized tung oil. So once I'm done with beveling the frets, if I have scraped off any finish, I can just simply wipe on a fresh application and let it dry. But But as I do this, the sound will actually begin to change as the ends get ground flush with the sides of the fretboard. And you can kind of hear it as I go. I don't think you'll hear it on the video, but I can hear it as I'm working. And then once I get the frets flat down to the flush with the sides, I can then lay the tool down so that the file is at a 35-degree angle to those ends. And then on the other side, it's basically the same way, but I just flip the neck around. As you can see, the process of grinding the fret ends produces a lot of metallic dust, which contaminates the fretboard. And if you're anal retentive, you'll probably want to mask off your fretboard. But I don't really worry about that. I just vacuum it off. Now I'm ready to do the initial fret leveling. And if you're new to doing this, I would recommend marking the tops of the fret wire with a Sharpie. And the reason for that is it will help you to see where you have ground off the top surface of the frets and where you haven't. Because what you ideally are trying to accomplish here is you want all of the tops of the frets to be ground off consistently from side to side and from one end of the fretboard to the other. And that, once you've done that, and once you've removed every trace of that Sharpie mark along the top, then you'll know your frets are level. But if there are spots where the Sharpie remains, those are low spots. And you need to make all of the tops of the frets level with the lowest spot on the lowest fret. That's how you get a fretboard, or the frets on your fretboard, level. Now, if you've been watching this series, you'll know that this fretboard is not a consistent radius. It's a conical radius. At the back end here, it's 16 inches, and at the nut end, it's 10 inches. So it's conical. Now, normally when you level frets, you want your fret leveling beam to be parallel with the center line of the fretboard. By doing that, you keep the tops of your frets at the same radius as the fretboard. But since this is a conical radius, instead of being parallel with the center line, I'm going to angle the beam so that it is parallel with the sides. That will preserve the conical radius so that the top of this fret back here is going to be 16 inches radius. Or actually, it's a tiny bit more because you have to account for the height of the fret wire. And at this end, it's going to be 10-inch radius, or slightly larger than 10 inches because of the height of the fret wire. Now I've already removed the Sharpie from this part of this fret, the end of this one, the end of this one, and this one, but I still have a lot of the Sharpie in different spots here. So I have to keep going until I've removed all of that Sharpie. And I'm not pressing down. I'm just using the weight of the beam. If you press down, for example, if you start in this position and you're pressing with your right hand as you move it, you're actually bending the neck. So I try not to apply any downward force, and I just use the weight of the beam itself. If you look closely, you can see that there's still a few spots where there is red Sharpie, and those are low spots. So I need to keep working in order to remove the last bit of that red Sharpie, and at that point I'll know that the frets are all level with respect to one another. I also have a shorter 8-inch steel leveling beam, which I can use to concentrate on areas that are proving to be a little bit more difficult. And I can also use it to create fall off on the end of the fretboard if that was something that I wanted to do. Typically, I won't add fall off unless after I've completely finished the guitar, I notice that there's some problematic string buzz up in this area. Then I can add fall off if necessary, but I don't just automatically do it. Now hopefully you can see this in this overhead view, but the way I move the beam back and forth is I start out with the beam parallel to the edge of the fretboard. Then as I move towards the center, it's straight along and parallel with the center line of the fretboard. Then when I get to the other side, I'm once again parallel with the edge. So it looks something like this. Now you'll notice I'm taking fairly long strokes as I do this, and the reason for that is because I want to make sure that the frets on the end are getting as close to an equal amount of grinding, I guess, as the frets towards the center. So I try to bring the beam almost all the way off the end of the fretboard at each end. I have one last fret here, well actually 3 of them back here, 4 of them, which still have Sharpie in the very center. They're proving to be a little bit more difficult. So I'm going to switch over to the 220 grit side. Okay, I've got all the frets level. There is no more Sharpie anywhere on it. And for those of you who are gasping in horror at all the grinding dust that has contaminated the surface of this fretboard and are pounding out your angry comments about how I should have masked it off, watch this. It's like magic. Vacuum cleaners are just so amazing. The next step in the process of doing this fretwork, this initial fretwork, would be to crown the frets. However, I want to devote a little bit more time to the tools and techniques that I use for generating the crown. And I think I'm going to do that in the next episode. So I hope you found this video to be useful and will give you some food for thought. If you have any comments or questions, post them down in the description below, and either I or one of the other members of my community will chime in. But in the meantime, as always, be sure to click the thumbs up button to show your support for this video and my channel. Visit the eGuitar Plans web store, the Highline Guitars merch store. There's links in the description below, and any purchase you make there will help support this channel so I can keep making these guitar building videos. And if you want to keep it simple, you can just click the thanks button and leave a tip in the amount that you think is fair. At any rate, take care, stay safe, and I hope you'll be back for the next episode in this exciting 6-string multi-scale fan fret guitar build.